welcome to the Deeper Thinking podcast. The Deeper Thinking podcast is produced as an independent, ad-free project. Its episodes are digitally narrated to manage the demands of research and editing while ensuring each installment is engaging, ethically considered and attentive to nuance. A lamp glows faintly in a darkened room, a fragile cone of light pushing against the weight of surrounding shadow. On the desk lies a page, waiting, its surface both invitation and demand. This image, half domestic and half symbolic, is not ornament but essence. It suggests that every beginning in philosophy and perhaps in politics arises from a choice whether to close the world away in the name of safety or to open it at the cost of risk. To open is to allow error, dissent, uncertainty. To close is to purchase harmony at the expense of freedom. The open society, Karl Popper's phrase, is never final. It is not a doctrine secured once for all, but a wager renewed each time citizens choose criticism over obedience, fallibility over perfection, beginnings over endings. Popper, an Austrian Jew, fled fascism in Europe in the 1930s, first to New Zealand, then to London. By the time the Second World War reached its most violent pitch, he was far from the battlefields, but not untouched by their menace. In exile, he began the work that would define his name, The Open Society and Its Enemies, published in 1945. Written against the backdrop of ruin, it was both an intellectual project and a moral appeal. Its task was urgent: to explain how civilizations collapse into tyranny and how they might resist the seduction of prophecy. For Popper, prophecy meant the belief that history follows a predetermined script. Philosophers who taught otherwise, who claimed destiny rather than contingency, he saw not as neutral scholars but as architects of disaster. Plato's Republic imagined a rigid order of classes where criticism became treason. Hegel treated history not as the uncertain result of human action, but as the unfolding of spirit. Marx, despite his promise of liberation, bound revolution to inevitability, insisting that history itself guaranteed its arrival. To Popper, each of these gestures offered comfort, but a dangerous comfort, the suggestion that freedom was unnecessary because the end was already secured. In place of this certainty, Popper offered method. An open society is not utopia, not perfection waiting at the horizon. It is the practice of admitting error, testing claims, discarding what fails, revising laws, allowing dissent to unsettle conviction. Fragile, yes, but resilient precisely because it refuses finality. The first section of this meditation rests here, in that flickering lamplight, on the reminder that beginnings matter. Openness is not sentiment but discipline, a readiness to start anew even in the face of fear. Every open society is born not once but again and again, as each generation chooses whether to protect the possibility of correction or surrender to the certainty of closure. The year is 1945. The war is nearly over, but the air is still thick with menace. In London, Karl Popper bends over his notes, trying to draw a line between collapse and survival, between the seduction of prophecy and the humility of revision. His wager is deceptively simple: that societies are safer when they allow criticism than when they forbid it, that dissent yields more fertile ground than obedience, that error is not weakness but the condition of learning. He insisted that falsification, the testing and discarding of ideas, should be at the centre of politics no less than in science. To close off criticism is to close off growth. What appears orderly becomes brittle. What looks secure decays into silence. This is why Popper treated openness not as a slogan but as a method. It is the refusal to treat conviction as sacred, the readiness to revise even what feels certain, the courage to begin again. Hannah Arendt would later call this natality, the human capacity to act unpredictably, to break repetition, to start anew. An open society is not born once but continually, because each generation must decide to keep it open. Isaiah Berlin sharpened the point: no society can resolve all values into one perfect whole. Liberty collides with equality, justice with mercy, security with freedom. These are not puzzles to be solved, but tragic conflicts to be managed. To imagine otherwise is to dream of purity, and purity, Berlin warned, is the ally of tyranny. Against historicists who claim to know the secret pattern of history, Popper argued that history is improvisation, not law. The idea that tomorrow is guaranteed by some hidden design transforms politics into prophecy. silencing opposition as blindness to destiny. John Rawls, though writing later, echoed this humility. Behind his veil of ignorance, none know their station. Justice, then, must be designed without appeal to destiny, with principles that remain fair no matter who finds themselves on the losing end. Jürgen Habermas pressed further, insisting that openness is procedure as much as ethos. Free press, constitutional courts, public debate, all those messy, deliberative structures that ensure conversation never hardens into command. Yet legitimacy is fragile. Francis Fukuyama would ask how institutions regain trust after collapse, while Timothy Snyder chronicles how authoritarianism corrodes gradually, silencing courts, capturing media, trimming liberties one by one. Amartya Sen reminds us that freedom is hollow without real capabilities, education, health, resources that make participation possible. Elinor Ostrom shows that communities govern best when authority is dispersed and overlapping, allowing local correction. Cass Sunstein argues for subtle reforms that preserve choice while nudging systems toward resilience. Together they form an architecture of openness, not invulnerable but alive, provisional, corrigible. Popper's lamp flickers, but the light holds. What protects us is not certainty, but the refusal to let certainty rule. Certainty has its own gravity. It pulls weary minds toward rest, offering the relief of believing that outcomes are scripted and that tomorrow has already been arranged. This is the seduction of the closed society, the comfort of knowing that someone somewhere possesses the design. It does not always appear brutal. Sometimes it arrives with the soft voice of reassurance, promising that chaos will be managed, that disorder will be silenced, but that all loose ends will be tied neatly. For a people exhausted by war, famine, or the clamour of endless debate, that promise feels like salvation. They crave order the way the drowning crave still water. Closure presents itself not as oppression but as rescue, yet what it rescues is not freedom but the illusion of safety. Popper named this closure for what it was, not simply authoritarianism, but the refusal of correction. To be closed is to treat criticism as betrayal, to imagine that harmony between values can be secured once and for all. But liberty and equality collide, justice and security collide, and no decree can resolve their conflict forever. To claim otherwise is to mask tyranny in the costume of peace. History shows how closure advances gradually, step by step. Courts are bent in the name of efficiency. Dissent is painted as treason. Newspapers are silenced for the sake of unity. Each measure feels protective until it is too late to reverse. Closure seduces less through violence than through the promise that sacrifice today will deliver certainty tomorrow. Popper countered with an experiment in imagination. Design a society without knowing whether you will be ruler or outcast, powerful or powerless. Who, under such ignorance, would consent to a system that could not be revised? Only openness, with its provisional rules and reversible mistakes, can be fair under such blindness. Fear is the soil in which closure grows strongest. Procedure is the antidote. Institutions that force reasons to be exchanged, criticisms to be heard, choices to be contested. But procedure alone is fragile. A hungry voice cannot deliberate, an illiterate one cannot test a claim. If only a privileged few are equipped to participate, openness decays into pretense. True resilience requires institutions that adapt visibly and fairly, so citizens see that correction remains possible. Communities across the world have shown this is not only theory. Councils that rewrite their rules when conditions shift, laws that expire unless renewed, assemblies where the weak as well as the strong can speak. These are safeguards against finality. None offers perfect safety, but together they preserve the space in which correction lives. The lamp on the philosopher's desk flickers, unfinished words waiting there, reminding us that to live without certainty is to honour the dignity of error, the humility of correction, the endurance of plurality. Prediction is a comfort story, a way of taming the unknown by pretending it has already been written. To believe history follows a clear path is to believe that one's struggles are merely steps toward a guaranteed destination. For many, this is not just a theory, but a form of relief. Hardship becomes bearable if it is framed as necessary, a stage along a staircase that cannot be avoided. This is what historicism offered, the sense that chaos had already been domesticated, that the turbulence of the present was nothing more than prearranged design. The danger lies not in wanting to know the future, but in mistaking guesses for laws. Once prediction hardens into inevitability, it becomes ideology, and ideology demands submission. A movement that claims to have unlocked history's secret does not allow questions. To question is to resist destiny itself. Popper opposed this with a principle deceptively modest yet radical in effect: falsification. No claim is final. Every truth is provisional, awaiting correction. Scientific theories survive only by being open to refutation, and politics, he argued, must live by the same discipline. Closed societies silence tests, open ones demand them. This principle extended into moral life. Isaiah Berlin emphasized that values collide irreconcilably. Liberty and equality cannot be permanently reconciled, nor justice and mercy. To imagine prophecy resolving these conflicts is to deny their tragic nature. By contrast, openness insists on constant negotiation. No victory is final, no claim immune to revision. The dangers of prophecy are not abstract. Timothy Snyder's Chronicles of Authoritarian Regimes show how rulers frame decrees as destiny, criminalize dissent as obstruction, and equate criticism with blindness to history's march. Against such fatalism, John Rawls offered his veil of ignorance, asking us to design justice without knowing our position within society. Under such blindness, no one would choose a system that forbade correction forever. Justice, therefore, requires the possibility of reversal, not loyalty to inevitability. To live without prophecy is unsettling, for it denies the comfort of certainty. Yet it is precisely this unsettlement that makes space for human action. Hannah Arendt called it natality, the capacity to begin anew, to interrupt the cycle. Jürgen Habermas translated this into institutional procedure, rational discourse, public scrutiny, deliberation that keeps societies from closing into commands. Amartya Sen extended the argument: without real capabilities, food, education, health, such openness is hollow. Civic equality, as others argued, must guarantee that all voices count, or else prophecy reasserts itself by silencing. Popper's wager rests here. History is not law, but improvisation, and survival depends on treating every blueprint as contingent, every certainty as suspect. Prophecy has not vanished, it has migrated. Today, it does not arrive in the square with manifestos or in pulpits with visions of destiny. Instead, it hums quietly in the background of digital life. The feed presents itself as spontaneous, but what appears before us has already been chosen. Algorithms rank, sort, and filter, predicting desire and rewarding conformity. What seems like openness, the multitude of voices online, is arranged so that patterns dominate and dissent sinks. Surprise is rationed. Repetition wears the mask of inevitability. To scroll is to accept a script written not by history's spirit, but by code, a prophecy built from data. The reassurance it offers is familiar, that what appears before us is what was always meant to appear. The ideology of inevitability has shifted from philosophy into infrastructure. This new prophecy is not merely epistemic, but economic. Prediction has become commodity. What is bought and sold is not truth, but profitable guesses about what we will do next. Surveillance finances the architecture of inevitability. Every keystroke, hesitation, or pause is harvested, refining scripts that claim to know us better than we know ourselves. Convenience becomes cover for extraction. What presents itself as service is often capture. In this way, prophecy wears a softer disguise, not command but care. Its seduction is not obedience through fear, but conformity through comfort. The consequences are not abstract. In Myanmar, falsehoods amplified on social platforms fueled violence, turning rumour into weapon. During the Arab Spring, activists used the same platforms to organise, yet their visibility exposed them to surveillance, enabling repression. In both cases, openness and closure intertwined. The promise of connection merged with the peril of manipulation. Voices travelled farther than ever before, but were also silenced, sorted, and sometimes turned against themselves. Digital prophecy is not myth, it is lived. What resists this new inevitability is transparency and reversibility. Systems must be designed to be seen and revised. Algorithms that can be audited, defaults that can be changed, rules that expire unless renewed, oversight councils that distribute authority. Communities that govern their digital spaces as they once governed forests or water provide living examples of adaptive openness. These practices insist that even machines can be corrected, that even infrastructures are provisional. The lamp on Popper's desk flickers in this new century, its light cast now across servers and screens. The question it poses remains sharp. What does it mean to remain open in a world where prediction is invisible, yet pervasive? The answer is unfinished, but perhaps that incompleteness is the safeguard itself. Openness is never innocent. To leave every door ajar is to allow storms as well as breezes, harm as well as discovery. Popper understood this even as he argued against closure, and defenders of order have always seized upon the danger. If freedom permits lies, then safety, they argue, requires constraint. If assembly permits conspiracy, then order demands limits. The logic is persuasive because it draws on real risks. Democracy cannot erase danger, it can only live with it. The open society asks us to endure this tension, refusing both the tyranny of silence and the chaos of noise. Rules, then, are not cages but instruments, frames that allow liberty to be heard, procedures that allow error to be corrected without collapse. The paradox is sharp. To refuse all correction is tyranny. To refuse all constraint is dissolution. Between them lies the fragile path of democratic life. To pretend otherwise, to dream of harmony without conflict, is to fall into yet another prophecy. The struggle plays out not in abstractions but in history. In the American South, students who sat at segregated lunch counters carried their bodies as shields against a system that treated equality as threat. The openness they demanded was dangerous to power, and the price they paid was arrests, beatings, firebombs. In South Africa, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission exposed wounds that many would have preferred to hide. Testimonies of violence and cruelty poured into public view. That exposure was painful, but it was also the beginning of renewal. In both cases, openness was not comfort, but courage. Institutions must learn to channel this courage without extinguishing it. Fairness demands rules designed as if none knew their place in society. Only under such blindness would citizens insist that protections be both strong and reversible. But rules can be bent. Authoritarian leaders have often used free speech itself to flood discourse with disinformation or freedom of assembly to organise against freedom. The open society cannot erase this danger. It can only adapt. Farmers rewriting water agreements when drought arrives, legislators writing sunset clauses into laws, overturning unjust precedents. These are examples of correction alive in practice. Each admits risk, yet refuses permanence. The lesson is humility. To live openly is to live with fragility, but fragility is not weakness. It is the very condition of renewal. The lamp sputters, smoke rising faintly from the filament, but the page receives another line. Openness is not exposure without defence. It is vigilance paired with care, the discipline of remaining corrigible even when risk cannot be removed. Popper did not imagine salvation through sweeping revolution. He distrusted grand designs that promised perfection in a single stroke. Instead, he argued for repair in increments, a steady practice of testing, discarding, and revising. He called this piecemeal social engineering, and though the phrase sounds modest, it stands as a direct challenge to utopian visions. The allure of the blueprint is obvious. It feels decisive, heroic, final. But finality is the danger. To reshape society all at once is to gamble lives on theory. To change in smaller steps is slower, less dazzling, but it preserves the possibility of correction. Corrigibility is what keeps freedom alive. This incremental method is not timidity, it is discipline. Every reform is a hypothesis subject to falsification. Hannah Arendt saw in this the spirit of natality, the capacity to begin again, not with revolution, but with repeated acts of renewal. Isaiah Berlin reminded us that no reform can harmonise all values. Conflicts between liberty and equality, justice and mercy remain tragic and permanent. The strength of piecemeal reform lies not in avoiding loss, but in making losses reversible. John Rawls sharpened the test. Would anyone behind the veil of ignorance consent to a policy that could not later be revised? Only reversible reforms honour fairness. Examples across societies echo this humility. Amartya Sen argued that genuine reform must expand real capabilities. Schools corrected when inequity appears, health systems revised when gaps emerge, voting laws amended when exclusion is exposed. Civic equality, as stressed by other thinkers, is indispensable. Reforms fail if only some citizens have standing to shape them. Jürgen Habermas pointed out that deliberation is equally vital. Reforms must be subject to public reasoning, not hidden in technocratic decree. Francis Fukuyama added that legitimacy flows from this openness. People accept change when they know it can be contested. By contrast, Snyder's histories warn us that authoritarian leaders favour sweeping decrees precisely because they foreclose correction. Elinor Ostrom provided reassurance in practice. Her research on commons governance revealed communities that designed, tested and revised rules adaptively, flourishing without a single point of authority. This polycentric model embodied Popper's vision: multiple sites of correction, no single point of failure. Cass Sunstein's work on nudges and transparent choice architectures fits here as well. They may look minor, but they preserve reversibility and protect freedom without promising perfection. Piecemeal reform frustrates those who demand immediacy, especially where suffering is urgent. Yet the alternative, revolutionary finality, often burns too bright, destroying what it claims to save. To engineer piecemeal is to respect time, to allow error without collapse, to bend without breaking. The lamp dims, but its line remains steady: progress without prophecy, reform without blueprint, freedom without perfection. Imagine the planner's voice first. It speaks with calm authority, offering schedules, numbers, and models of efficiency. Its tone is patient but immovable. Freedom, it insists, is waste. Disagreement is delay. If we wish to be safe, we must be guided. The accidents of human choice are indulgence we cannot afford. Trust the plan, trust the chart, trust those who see farther than you. Now imagine the regulator answering. Its voice is less smooth, sometimes halting, even contradictory, but resolute. It warns that safety bought through obedience is brittle, that order imposed without consent corrodes from within. It does not reject structure, but insists that structure must be transparent, revisable, and answerable to those it governs. Where the planner promises finality, the regulator defends corrigibility. Every rule provisional, every policy reversible, every decree open to testing. The tension between planner and regulator is not trivial. Both appeal to real fears. Disorder is dangerous, but so too is perfection. No formula can dissolve this contradiction. It must be managed, not solved. Fairness, rules suggested, is possible only when rules are designed as though no one knew in advance whether they would be ruler or ruled, silenced or empowered. Imagine drafting digital laws under that blindness. Who would accept platforms without exit, without correction, without redress? Only reversibility can make design just. But fairness is hollow if citizens lack the means to use it. Hungry or excluded voices cannot deliberate. Inequality silences before censorship does. Legitimacy survives only if procedures work in practice, if citizens trust that decisions can be contested and rules revised. When that trust erodes, the planner's voice grows louder. Efficiency begins to sound more persuasive, its promise of relief more tempting. History shows how capture begins here. Judges bent to loyalty, newspapers branded enemies, dissent recast as chaos. Authoritarianism does not roar in with sudden thunder. It advances incrementally, each step cloaked as necessity. Yet communities have shown another path. Farmers managing scarce water rewrite agreements when conditions change. Legislators write sunset clauses into law. Courts insist that even long-standing precedents may be overturned when unjust. These are practices of openness, lived not in theory, but in stubborn adaptation. Popper knew the planner's voice would never disappear. The temptation of final order always returns, as does the resistance of revision. The true danger lies not in their coexistence, but in one overwhelming the other. To preserve contradiction itself is the work of the open society. The lamp burns lower, the page thick with crossings out, testimony to a dialogue without conclusion. What endures is not verdict, but conversation. Not harmony, but the refusal to let one voice silence the other. An open society is not closure, but debate sustained, fragile yet unbroken. The room returns. The lamp is dim, its light stretched thin, and Popper's hand slows as though the questions themselves resist conclusion. What, finally, is openness if not exposure? Yet exposure alone cannot sustain a society. It must be tempered by care, by institutions capable of holding difference without erasing it. Every answer trails a shadow, every safeguard raises a new risk, every liberty hints at its own undoing. To end, then, is impossible. The open society lingers in tension between necessity and possibility. Truth is provisional, every claim a hypothesis awaiting correction. To accept this is to accept a life without harmony, to recognise that values collide without reconciliation. Justice can be fair only if its rules can be reversed, if no error is beyond repair. Legitimacy does not rest in promises of perfection, but in procedures that let citizens argue, deliberate and contest without fear. But such procedures must be more than formal, they must be usable. A voice silenced by hunger or poverty is no voice at all. Authoritarianism rarely announces itself with fanfare, it arrives quietly, courts bent to loyalty, papers shuttered or bought, small freedoms clipped one by one. Trust dies gradually until the planner's voice, offering order, efficiency, certainty, feels like salvation. Against this stands the work of repair, councils that rewrite rules when shortages strike, laws that expire unless renewed, assemblies where the powerless can speak alongside the powerful. Each of these practices proclaims that correction is possible, that permanence is not destiny. Openness is not confined to European parliaments or Western debate rooms. It emerges in South African citizens testifying to horror so that reconciliation might begin, in Ghanaian villages gathering to deliberate, in young people marching for climate justice, in women queuing to vote where once they were forbidden. These are beginnings, fragile but real, reminders that fragility is not despair but the very condition of renewal. Colonial legacies complicate the picture. Openness proclaimed by empire often concealed domination. Achille Mbembe reminds us that colonialism was itself a closed society, arranging entire populations into destiny without consent. To speak of openness today without reckoning with that inheritance is to speak half-truth. Yet even here renewal is possible. India's experiment with democracy, vast and multilingual, is both warning and wager. South Africa's transition from apartheid showed openness as repair. Ghana's local forums embody Elinor Ostrom's principle that commons governance thrives beyond the West. These are not parables of perfection, but of resilience, of societies refusing to be finished, refusing to let inherited scripts dictate their future. The lamp hums faintly. The page before the philosopher is not filled with conclusions, but with crossings, pauses, and questions left deliberately open. To guard openness is to accept incompleteness, to live with the truth that fragility is not weakness, but the condition of life itself. The lamp flickers one last time, its filament trembling, but the page is not empty. It is crowded with crossings out, fragments, and questions that resist closure. This refusal is part of the truth. An open society does not offer a clean ending. It offers only the discipline of remaining unfinished. Prophecy tempts with finality, but freedom survives in the willingness to keep the story incomplete. Openness is not victory, but vigilance. Its strength lies not in spectacle or perfection, but in resilience, the ability to correct without collapse. Every principle must remain provisional, every institution subject to repair. To design as though the future were already known is to smother it. To leave room for revision is to trust that citizens will act, speak, and begin anew. Conflict will never vanish. Disagreement is not failure, but the pulse of freedom itself. The echoes are global. A ballot cast by a first-time voter in Ghana, a student speaking across languages in an Indian assembly, a survivor of apartheid testifying before a commission. These gestures of openness are fragile, but fragility is not weakness. Each insists the future is unwritten, that beginnings remain possible even after centuries of exclusion. Colonial legacies endure, carrying the weight of closure, but they do not have the last word so long as voices rise against them. The temptations remain strong, data-driven systems that whisper inevitability, strong men who promise safety if only dissent is silenced. Against these, openness offers no grand spectacle and no final answer. It offers instead the dignity of correction, the humility of error, the endurance of plurality. To live with these is to live with freedom itself. The lamp hums once more, then fades into dark, yet in imagination the philosopher still leans over the page. The war has long ended, but the gesture remains, a hand moving across paper, refusing to let the work be finished. The story of the open society survives only by being retold, begun again in every generation. Its only true ending would be closure itself. As long as light, however faint, is carried forward through ballots, assemblies, protests, and conversations, that ending will not come. The open society is fragile, but fragility is its condition of life. To guard it is to shoulder responsibility for beginnings, for keeping the page unfinished, for resisting the ease of prophecy. The lamp dies, but its glow survives in the vigilance of those who refuse to surrender freedom to certainty.